This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
I'm in a cranky mood today, so I will bring this up.
May God have mercy on all of our souls.
The headings and footnotes contained in this license are for reference purposes only and shall not reflect in any way the meaning or interpretation of this license.
Listen, get it together, folks.
You know, you can always count on me and Dael to get mad and get in the weeds and talk about the little things we don't like. And then Shawn comes in to really get down to brass tacks and tell it like it is.
What do you think of season 2 so far? Do you enjoy it?
I don't enjoy much in life, but...
All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the number one tabletop RPG and D&D podcast in all the realms, with number 2, as voted by EN World, clearly being Mastering Dungeons, which features one of our affable cast members, Shawn Merwin. My name is Ben Byrne, here with Shawn Merwin, James Hake, Dael Kingsmill. Dael, I have to ask, in your time as a game master, what is one of the worst NPC names that you have ever given one of your NPCs?
Oh, gosh. Okay, so it's not a very exciting name. The name was just Simon, but it stands out to me in my memory because I'd built up this kind of story. It was the party had found a dying soldier who was, just asking them to take this ring to the grave of his husband in a, not too far away town. And, I built this whole thing up and I, was pitching the whole thing. It was all working exactly as planned. And then I said that the inside of the ring had an inscription, and that inscription said, "Love, Simon."
Yeah, this sounds familiar.
The whole thing just fell apart.
I like this question because I feel like every GM has a story about this sort of thing. And this will become relevant later in the episode. But until that time, James Hake, the worst NPC you've ever named.
I'm racking my brain for a story like Dael's, but the one that comes to mind for me is the story of a villain who I named. She was a fire sorceress. She was scouring the desert for a legendary blade of flame. I called her Phlogiston, after the Greek element of phlogiston. And boy, oh boy, did my players make fun of me.
Did they appreciate the etymology?
They did not even a little bit, those Philistines.
Shawn Merwin, surely you have some fantastic examples of this.
Oh, I have some horrifying examples, but sadly, the worst that I ever ended up doing was one that got panned universally by many people because it was in a published product.
And, oh, good.
Oh, yes. And for me, it was an innocent thing, and for everyone else, it was heresy. But this was in the Halls of Undermountain adventure, where we see what happens in Undermountain and at the Yawning Portal Tavern 150 years later, because, of course, 4th edition moved the timeline of the Forgotten Realms forward 150 years. And the famous owner of the Yawning Portal is Durnan the Wanderer. And so we had to create the Yawning Portal for this adventure. And I was thinking, it's been 150 years since Durnan was born. Obviously, he would be dead by now. Who would own this Yawning Portal? Well, you would want to keep it in the family. Durnan was a lord of Waterdeep. So why don't we also name this character Durnan? So he was Durnan the Sixth. I thought they would want to keep the name going. They would want everyone to remember Durnan. So Durnan the Sixth went into the adventure, and which I thought was fine. He doesn't play an important role in the adventure. It was just, who is this? Well, people did not like that for a lot of reasons. I got mocked by people at Wizards of the Coast after the adventure was published. Publicly, they did not name me personally, of course, but they just said, well, in this one adventure, Durnan the Sixth, but, that's sort of silly. And so Durnan came back 150 years later, drinking, potions of longevity so he can still be alive, despite already having a family. What happened to them? But let's not worry about that, right? We don't want to mess with our lore. So Durnan the Sixth is probably my biggest regret as a named NPC.
I feel that shouldn't be the case because as someone who prefers low
Seems
magic
unjust.
settings, I
Mhm.
prefer the idea that they pass the name on to the next person and the next. But there's a real Nurse Joy kind of Officer Jenny vibe to it that I appreciate.
I mean,
what a
I would have
perfectly
rather
reasonable
named
thing to do, Shawn.
I would
dare
have named
you.
rather like I leaned over now owns the yawning portal. Are we all happy now? I mean, really. But a point of this is no matter what you do, someone will not like it.
Yeah.
And I've leaned into it now. I just make up ridiculous names knowing that even if I try to make a really cool sounding name, someone is going to mess with it anyway. So just have fun. Just name it after Greek goddesses or humors or whatever, and just have fun, enjoy it, roll with it.
I find I don't do too many of the ridiculous names because my example of this was similar to Dael's, where they were in a pirate town with lots of ships on the harbor, and they were talking to pirates, and a pirate was trying to kill them, and so they were getting information from another pirate. Everybody's pirates, and it's there's this guy down the back. He might have information for you. He's got a hood on. He's got one leg. He's missing fingers. Eye patch and scarred face. This guy's seen some stuff, and he's like, I be able to tell ye some stories indeed, and he wove this tale together that I had the whole thing written down, but for whatever reason didn't write down his name. And it was the last question. They were like, all right, well, I think we've got the information here we need. What was your name? And I went, Justin, just like trying to come up with something. And so they were like, it was a real like Bill the Vampire moment of like Justin the pirate. No, all right, that's his name. And he became a recurring NPC that haunted me forever.
I love Justin the pirate. You shouldn't feel bad about that.
Don't feel bad.
I imagine there were many pirates named Justin in their day.
Yeah, it be a common name, yar. My father be named Justin too, and his father.
Justin the Sixth.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And the fans were outraged.
Well, speaking of fan outrage, that brings us sort of perfectly into our next segment. Thanks for that, James. That was...
I live to serve.
Really teed me up a softball there. All right, we are going to pinch our nose, hold our breath, and dive once more into the ongoing saga of the OGL.
Oh, good.
And in typical Lorecast fashion, big news dropped, I think, literally hours after we did the live episode, which I frankly don't mind because it gives us all a week to kind of consider.
It's become part
our
of our
responses.
identity. I think if news dropped the day before, we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves.
It's true. I had thought about pending availabilities, whether we do just move the show down a day or something like that. But now I think we own it. We just own it.
Plus, we all know that if we moved the show back a day, the news would just come out a day later.
Which we just ruin it for everyone else. Everybody else would have to wait. Welcome, Maddie P. Maddie P coming in just in time, rating us for the OGL discussion, what everybody's really hyped to hear more about, I'm sure. Wizards came out with a much more apologetic tone. I think maybe their statement had been out. Their initial statement had been out before we recorded. I don't quite remember. And now they have released OGL 1.2 as a preliminary document asking for feedback about what the audience, the public, the general fan base think about this. I've kind of skimmed through it. Full disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. None of us are lawyers. We're all probably sick of hearing from lawyers on this sort of stuff. I don't know. I'm pretty exhausted. Does anybody have anything they want to talk about? Anything they want to share?
Oh, golly. I've got my printed out version in front. I did the opposite of you, Ben. I read through it all and then I made my lawyer father sit down with me and go through it all again, just to ensure that I understood everything correctly. And then I formulated my thoughts on it. And then I wrote them out. And then I decided which ones I would share publicly and which ones I would keep to the survey. And then I filled out my survey. So, I've done my due diligence. And I do think that everyone should fill out the survey. I'm looking at I've got scribbled notes all over my copy. So anyone else can talk while I'm just finding anything that I think is important to discuss.
Yeah, I'll talk. I did very much the same thing as Dael, except I don't have a lawyer father. So I just kind of scoured.
You also sat down with my dad?
Yeah, I sat down with Dael's dad. I don't even know your dad's name. Hey,
Dael's dad.
Dave?
Like, it's just like Dael's mum is
Justin.
Justin?
All right, Vernon, let's talk.
Dael's dad. Let us talk law of the high seas, the pirate
Maritime
law.
law.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I watched the Legal Eagle video. I watched a number of what I would consider reputable discussions about this, and read the document, formed an opinion, and filled out the survey, and then gave what I would consider kind of like a voting guide to my opinion on Twitter.
Yeah.
Because this to me is like voting. This is like doing your civic duty. Even if we don't fully trust the process, even if we're unsure of just how impactful our individual survey submissions will be in the grand scheme of things, it's important that we make ourselves heard. And to me, it was important that I made myself heard in a way that, made me seem like a reasonable person rather than sort of a howling maenad on the internet, willing to discuss nothing and hear no differing opinions, that sort of thing. And there's a couple of things that I think are really, really important here in this document. And they are mostly to do with the things that allow the license to be revoked. Because to me, that's kind of the central hub of this entire discussion. There's OGL 1 being revoked, and there's, can this OGL ever be revoked? Because we don't want to see a chaotic situation like this happen again. We don't want to build an industry on a foundational document for 20 years, and then all of a sudden, because the parent company decides they want more money, have the rug pulled out from everyone. And all of a sudden, no one knows what their 3-year plan is. And so there's a couple of things in that document that really make it unclear whether or not the OGL 1.2 that we're discussing here can be revoked. One is them kind of sneakily changing the definition of irrevocable. Dael, I see you kind of smiling along to that. Do you want to talk about this? Have you got your thoughts in order?
Well, I've got that section here highlighted as well. I think a lot of people are talking about this one in section 2, where they are defining a bunch of different terms, and in amongst it, they use the word irrevocable, which again, this is all just
I just feel like I've stepped into an episode of Ally McBeal suddenly, as like both James and Dael have their law. Now, if I draw your attention to,
if I could bring your attention to section 2,
yeah, exactly. Section 2F.
But it is interesting that this is one of the terms that the broader community picked up on, right? It was the idea of an irrevocable license. And so that is one of the terms that most, lay folk who are in the community are looking for in this new license. And so they've included that word, and then they've defined irrevocable to meaning that content licensed under this license can never be withdrawn from the license, which is a great sentence.
That's not what we were talking about, irrevocable.
Right. So it's not describing the license itself as irrevocable. It's saying that content licensed under it will always be licensed under it. They can't sort of take that away from you, except for all these other clauses later in the OGL 1.2 that do make it so that they can do that. But, it's one of those things where you do kind of have to look at that and say, okay, but if the license as a whole were to be revoked, would that not ultimately affect everything that was licensed under it anyway? Is that are we actually getting something out of that? Or is that in some ways sort of an empty statement? Go ahead.
Well, and so there's that, which is a big, hey, wait a sec, you're trying to pull a fast one on us sort of situation. It's like that does not seem like a very good faith statement to notice that there's an argument around, we want this to be irrevocable, and then, slyly change the definition of irrevocable on us. Seems like a hollow attempt to mollify outrage. But the other thing is, Dael, you mentioned this just a moment ago, is the many ways in which one can be stripped of a license. And it ties into, I think, an even bigger issue that I'll get into. But to sum this up, there's a morality clause in the new OGL. There is a way to, if you do something that Wizards considers to be, there's a whole list of adjectives that I don't have in front of me right now, but say illegal, or
I think obscene was one of
obscene.
them that kind of
Obscene
really
is the
stood
word that
out
I
to
take
me as like
particular
weirdly
issue with.
vague.
Yes, that's the thing. The vagueness of the word obscene brings up a whole lot of sort of puritanical stuff. In FAQs and things like that, Wizard says, we want to stop transphobia. We want to stop racism in licensed products. And that's a lot of good talk. But it's the sort of thing where if you use a blanket term like obscene, well, what happens if a highly sort of anti-gay regime appears at Wizards, for example? Wizards has in the past on the DM's Guild revoked some explicitly queer content, some, queer in the way that isn't particularly marketable, like, leather daddies and drag queens sort of thing, and making Curse of Strahd very sort of like queer clubby. And it's like, that's perfectly legitimate. And some people might think that that is, not what they want to buy. But were someone to say, well, that's obscene, and many people have in the past said things like that are obscene, Wizards' track record with de-licensing content like that does not inspire trust in that sort of wording.
Yeah. So what we're talking about for the folks following along at home is Section 6F.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky situation, right? So what they're doing here is they're building in a defense for themselves, which is very understandable. That's what a lot of contracts become. It's a company defending themselves. And so we see that as well in Section 3, which has its own problems. We see a lot of that cropping up in here. But the tricky thing is that you cannot create a morality clause that defines extraordinarily clearly the things that you are, saying we don't want this, because that leaves so much room for loopholes. That's when people can use that extraordinary level of definition to go, well, you didn't say that you wouldn't allow this thing, right? You made this long list and you didn't include this, so you are kind of implicitly allowing that, right? So what we don't want is for them to say, these are the explicit things that we don't want here. But we do need them to define beyond these vague terms, as James and Ben were just saying, that they're so vague and so based on objective morality, which is, we can have an idea of what Wizards is saying they would like to protect against, but say down the line, some party like Hasbro sells Wizards of the Coast to some other company, who have their own feelings about what, and it's different from Wizards of the Coast's current thing. What we need is general guidelines that are directly pointed to in the license that people can use, because it's two things, right? This whole thing, this whole process, this whole hullabaloo is ultimately about independent creators and third-party publishers being able to feel secure in creating work in line with this license, right? And you cannot feel secure if that license is going to be taken away at any time. And you cannot feel secure if you don't know that the work you're publishing is going to meet this vague morality standard. So what we need is something that is external, that is, this covers racism, this covers homophobia, this covers this, without getting too specific, but that is directly referenced within the license so that people can point to it, and people need to be able to defend themselves. That's a really tricky thing about this morality clause, is that it basically says we have the final call on whether it is or isn't, and you're not allowed to argue with that, right? You're not allowed to defend yourself afterwards, and not having any recourse to argue with that sort of decision that they make leaves you in a really tricky position for unforeseen future things. It's a tricky thing, because even if the company does have, really good intentions, in business, often these kinds of things will be used to appease sudden social shifts, right? You basically are able to shift the blame if something goes wrong onto the independent rather than onto the company itself. So whether or not the company thinks, homophobia is bad, if something were to suddenly shift in the culture and have people outraged that this OGL 1.2 licensed product includes a gay couple, Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast would be able to cut that person off just because it defends themselves, right? And so what we need in this is they can defend themselves. I have no issue with that, but we also need the ability to defend ourselves. Ultimately, what a lot of it comes down to.
I want to get to maybe the root of why this morality clause might exist. And it's something that I find to be, at its most elemental form, completely reasonable. Wizards is a company that wants to protect themselves and their brand. That's a perfectly reasonable thing for a company to do. I want Ghostfire to be able to protect their brands. I want Kobold Press to be able to protect their brands, that sort of thing. But the reason why they have to protect their brand in this license is actually a little curious, because this OGL does something that the OGL 1.0 never did, and it explicitly ties it to the Dungeons and Dragons brand.
Yeah.
The original OGL very clearly is like, you cannot use the words D&D or the other IP of Wizards of the Coast in this license. This license, this OGL makes no mention of the fact that you can't say D&D in your product. In fact, it seems to be implicitly, kind of by exclusion, encouraging you to do so. And then explicitly encouraging you to do so by creating creator content badges with the D&D ampersand on it. So this license is, in that fundamental way, extremely different from the old one, and maybe more similar to, say, for example, the DM's Guild license. And I want to draw a historical comparison here to the original OGL in those heady days of 2003 or whatever, when there was an OGL, the one we've known and loved for 20 years, and there was kind of an additional licensing component on top of that, the D20 system. But the D20 system was a licensed sort of trademark from Wizards of the Coast that was very specifically tied to certain OGL using products like D20 Modern, right? It was all part of the big D20 system family. I might be very wrong about this, but early Paizo stuff all had D20 system logo marks on their covers. There's a lot of the stuff that premiered when 3rd edition was coming out to market very clearly as this is a 3rd edition compatible product, like Gen Con. Forget the name of this, like Sword and Fantasy or one of those systems. I forget the name exactly, but these were all D20 system products. There was one product in particular that caught the brand recognition ire of Wizards of the Coast. It used that D20 system badge, essentially, and it was the infamous Book of Erotic Fantasy, which was written in part by someone who had written a lot of books, both game books and I think novels for Wizards of the Coast. I don't remember her name, but she was involved in the project. And, Wizards of the Coast
Kestrel.
did not. Yes, Gwendolyn Kestrel. Well, Wizards didn't like having explicit sexual content associated with their brand. And, as a young child hearing about this, I was like, yeah, they shouldn't let that happen. Now, as an adult hearing about this, I'm like, well, we can be responsible consumers here. We don't have to let this sort of thing reflect upon the D&D brand. And kind of Wizards thought, well, we should head off any opportunity of letting this impact our brand by revoking its D20 system branding. They can still publish it under the OGL, but they cannot brand it as a D20 system anymore. So there was effectively a 2-level situation going on here, right? There's the OGL, which had no connection to the D&D brand, and the D20 system, which had a level of officialness attached to it. And if Wizards took one away, the other one still existed. There is no distinction like that anymore. If Wizards decides your content is obscene for whatever spurious reason they may choose to, there's no longer a baseline for you to fall back to, other than something we haven't talked about yet, the D&D's basic sort of mechanical core being released in a very limited way into the Creative Commons.
You've said so many things that I want to touch on. There's so much happening all at once.
Just going to clean the slate for the run list for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, I know, right? Because it's that question: where do you draw the line of what is obscene? Right? Is sex obscene? Is violence obscene? Because that's going to become an issue. You know what I mean? Like all these things. But on top of that, I do want to highlight, because there is something you've brought up here. So there is this thing of associating your product with D&D directly, particularly with these creator badges. But it seems almost like they're still a little bit on the fence with this, right? Because if you look at section 6D, no endorsement, except as otherwise expressly allowed by this license, you will not state, suggest, or imply that your licensed works are endorsed or associated by us. They still don't want you to necessarily be publishing stuff that says, yeah, this is a D&D related thing that they don't have control over. But they're at the same time pushing you to use the creator content badge, because if you look at section 5A, you have an option. Either you use the creator content badge, which I assume I followed the link through, but the guidelines didn't exist. It just took me to the to the post homepage, which was frustrating. But if we're assuming that it is something along the lines of the DM's Guild, system, then you assume that that's going to be put on the cover, right? Which comes with its own weird little sort of ickiness. But the other option is include the entirety of this OGL 1.2, which is a 3 to 6 page document, depending on which stuff you're including in it, that's full of kind of unnecessary naturalized language. And it's just a much bigger ask than the previous OGL, which was 1 page. You know what I mean? And it's not something that it doesn't strike me as absolutely necessary that you must include the entire text of the OGL 1.2. There would be alternatives that are reasonably sized. What it's doing is driving you to use the creator content badge. And it's interesting to have that is going to sort of imply a connection with D&D that they later in the OGL 1.2 seem not to want. I did mention this in my survey because I thought that was odd. There's so many layers. Also, I mean, I mentioned the naturalized language. This is just my bugbear. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm in a cranky mood today, so I will bring this up. It's this thing, this insistence on using naturalized language in terms of particularly the headings and subheadings and things. You control your content will be the name of the section or whatever, and so then they have to include in section 9, section 9F. Headings and footnotes. The headings and footnotes contained in this license are for reference purposes only and shall not reflect in any way the meaning or interpretation of this license. And I think that's so funny because it's like, okay, well, if they're not accurate enough to count as interpreting what is being said in the license, then how do you think they're accurate enough for you to use to communicate with us? Yeah. You know what I mean?
I suppose, every time you say C section, number, letter, half my brain just starts to check out.
And I'm very sorry for that, but it's also really important for making sure that during these things that we're, talking to the same points. I thought it was really odd in the survey that they chose to use these headings to direct you to what sections they're talking about instead of using the section numbers.
I assume it's because this being for public consumption in terms of getting the opinion of a large swath of the community. Because when we were talking about, is it 7F or it's 6F? It's something F. When we were talking about the obscene kind of clause before, it's worded in a way to sound very reasonable, right? But obviously, as we've already touched on, all the power is still nested with wizards in terms of how any disagreements might arise around that. So who knows whether this will be, because this is a draft, right? Who knows if this will be what the actual license finally looks like, but it's deliberately worded in this way to be understood by folks like myself who never read the terms and conditions, right? And so that I can get through it without my brain just going what? I didn't understand any of that, that just words on a page.
Here's an interesting thing for you and I, Ben. By Australian law, even a contract or a T&C policy or any number of things, even though it is a legal document and you have agreed to use it, if it went to court and it was found unreasonable to expect a layperson to read and understand that thing, if it was found to be too long, if it was found to be unjust in the things that you have agreed to, it doesn't hold up in court, even though it is a legal document. That's it's not that it doesn't, it's that it doesn't have to. A court can decide that the contract is void based on that. But that doesn't seem to be the case in US law. And that is an interesting thing to bring up here as well, is that this is a bizarre situation where we're dealing with an international legal thing, right? I've seen people worried that it's declared that it's using the law of the state of Washington in the United States. That just kind of has to happen because this is such an international thing. But yeah, it's such an unusual situation to be in basically contract negotiations between a corporation and then just thousands
everyone
of people.
Else.
It's extremely unusual. And so that's how we end up in this situation where we're having to balance language that people can understand, but also clarity. in terms of what we're discussing. And I do think that it's valuable to have things described in language that is understandable. But when you are going to the lengths of saying, right, but those things that we said that were understandable, you can't rely on those, legally speaking, I do find unusual. And then to follow it up by having the survey just sort of say, oh, we're talking about the section on content covered or whatever, and have no further definition of what is being described, does get odd. And then there are things like this part just rubbed me the wrong way when I first read it, where they're talking about submitting the core rules to Creative Commons, CC BY 4.0, which is Creative Commons attribution. It just means that you can do whatever you want with it. You can make money, any of those things, but you do have to give attribution to the person who created it. And that's great. I super stand by that. I'm really jazzed about that. I think that's great news. And I hope that they do it for future SRDs. But then they follow it up with, this means that Wizards is not placing any limitations at all on how you use that content. And they use italics and they use bold on any limitations at all. And I understand what they're trying to get across with that, but it rubs me the wrong way because it is not literally true. There is a separate Creative Commons license, the CC0, that is a license that exists that actually doesn't put any limitations at all on how you use it. So it just seems like a weird thing to do, to put in an extraneous statement that is for emphasis and for show, that is not actually technically legally true in what amounts to a legal document.
And here's the thing. Dael has such an excellent, well thought out, legally, like crystal clear description of what's going on here. And yet, in this whole process, hers will be one voice among thousands, many of whose voices will not be so well researched or so eloquent. That, to me, does not exactly inspire confidence. And, you know, ever since they announced, well, we'll be talking with everyone, this is just a great example of it. It doesn't inspire confidence in the fact that they'll really be taking any of this seriously. Because if they really wanted to take this feedback seriously, they'd speak with individuals who have well thought out and eloquent things to say about it, not invoking sort of the law of the masses here, which they can choose to listen to or discard however they see fit, if indeed they listen to it at all. Which, you know, I have to trust they will. It's my civic duty to respond to this survey. But I guess the word is hope. I have to hope that they will rather than trust that they will. Because, if we trusted that they would, they'd be speaking with all of these third-party companies that are speaking out about it, right? We know they've talked with Kickstarter. They'd speak with Kobold Press. They'd speak with us. They'd speak with Paizo. They'd speak with MCDM and figure out a solution that works for all of these people rather than saying, going to the open mic night and saying, now what's wrong with it?
May God have mercy on all of our souls.
Yes.
Hi, Wizards of the Coast. Shawn here. Maybe you remember me. I used to be a contractor for you. I work for Ghostfire now, but I'm taking off.
Done in the 6th.
I'm taking off my Ghostfire cap. Listen, get it together, folks. Talk to your business people. See what they're willing to do and not do. Then get to your lawyerly folks. Tell them what you will do and not do. And get us a one-page open gaming license that does what you need it to do, whatever your cutoff thing is, and let us know what that is. Then we can all out here decide how we're going to move forward. But this has been handled so bass-ackwards that it's amazing. As James said, right? You get what you want. You find a way to, as well as you can without lying, tell everyone in the world what that is, and then you go forward from there. Because you show me 10 copyright lawyers and I'll show you 10 different opinions. Imagine now times 1 million with people that don't know what they're talking about. That's the situation that we're in right now. We can sit here and debate every clause and every word of this contract that could be thrown out tomorrow with a whole new contract coming out. And we've just wasted how many hours of our lives trying to figure everything out.
A whole Lorecast.
we can't even agree
Just about.
with a subclass, right, that you put out for playtesting. Some people think it's the greatest thing ever. Some people think it's terrible. This is a game that's relatively benign and not that complicated when you compare that to contract law. So if you can't do that, if we as consumers and as players and playtesters can't even agree on that, there's no way we're going to agree with each other, with you, with anyone on this. So let's all get together. Let's all get it together, figure out what we all want, and let's talk about this and let's get something done so we can all move forward with the game. If this open gaming license is there to stop video games and movies and other content from being made, then just do that. Forget the morality clause that you're trying to sort of give as a smokescreen, maybe, because really, do you care about what happens in these supplements? There are so many supplements on the DM's Guild non-drive-through right now that I'm sure are obscene and vulgar, depending on your definition, that are just there. So if it's really about these big ticket items that you don't want and have to get rid of OGL 1.0 because that gives people license to make these things, then just come out and say that and find a way to get that across. Bite the bullet. You won't be popular, but you're not popular right now anyway. Let's just get down to brass tacks. The genie is out of the bottle. You might be able to get the genie's head and arm and leg back in, but there's still going to be an arm and a leg sticking out somehow. It's there. It's done. Let's get it together and let's move on.
You can always count on me and Dael to get mad and get in the weeds and talk about the little things we don't like. And then Shawn comes in to really get down to brass tacks and tell it like it is. Yeah.
It's never easy
clock
being
ticking, right? Death is hanging over me.
Right.
I just want to make game stuff. Let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a challenge that we just demonstrated there, actually, being on a podcast like this, trying to note when other people kind of have something to say or want to chime in or whatever without speaking over each other. And so as James and Dael were sort of discussing their thoughts, I was watching Shawn like a bottle of champagne being shaken up, just sort of like, yeah. And then it just all...
It's the science fair volcano. It's a coming.
Yes.
God bless.
All right. Well, speaking of fun things, which this is all...
Should we put a disclaimer here that there's so much more to talk about, but we can't talk about everything?
Yeah.
Just so that the people listening know. We know about the other things, but...
Yeah. I really thought this was going to be a quick section, funnily enough. I don't know why I thought that.
I don't know why you thought that either.
You fool. You absolute rube.
I fooled myself.
You jingling jester.
Yeah, I reckon. Well, speaking of Jester, that famous character from Campaign 2 of Critical Role, she is not in the Legend of Vox Machina because it is not a show about the Mighty Nine. It is about, as the title implies, Vox Machina. Managed it. Anyway.
Really thought you had something going there for a minute.
Quick disclaimer. All right, let's put a time limit on this because I know that not everybody who will have wanted to have seen it will have watched the first 3 episodes. Does this include Dael? Okay. All right, skipping topic. Anyway, moving on.
I'm sorry. I've had a busy week.
I actually did my homework. I actually watched those 3 episodes.
You know what? Y'all should talk about it. I can play Shawn in this part.
That would be terrifying, but I would love to see it.
Let's just do this quickly then. All right. So I was about to give a big spoiler disclaimer, but I'm not gonna. We'll avoid spoilers. We'll keep this short and sharp. And then next week we'll discuss the first 3 episodes. Maybe the 4th will be out by then. And there's something I wanted to talk about which related to the start of this episode, but that's all right. Shawn Merwin, Legends of Vox Machina season 2. Did you see?
I saw the campaign. Talk about whatever.
Spoilers abound. Did you watch Legends of Vox Machina season 1, Shawn?
I watched the first 3 or 4 episodes.
Okay, cool. And then kind of, what do you think of season 2 so far? Do you enjoy it?
It's fine. I don't enjoy much in life, but so that's not a that's not a a knock on it. I think for the people that are really into that story, seeing it brought to life visually and treated with that in that sort of medium is a wonderful thing. What I did was I watched the D&D movie trailer, and then I watched this, and I sort of tried to juxtapose the two in terms of how does it show D&D, and it's very similar in terms of D&D messaging for how gameplay is portrayed, or how sort of the lifestyle, the culture of the characters are portrayed. Right? It's the sort of drama quip.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I think both of those things sort of catch the spirit of a lot of D&D, which is it's part drama, part comedy. Sometimes even things that try to be comic turn to drama, and things that try to be dramatic turn to comedy with home gaming groups. So I like the way that both of those things capture that.
Yeah, I agree. I am a little exhausted. The new trailer for Honor Among Thieves dropped, I think, literally like 2 or 3 hours ago, maybe more now, but dropped in the night here in Australia. And my wife called me an old man because I told her I was just exhausted on every line being a quip. I was just like, Quipalia, the realm of quips, where everybody speaks only in quips. And look, the lines in the trailer were funny. If that had been the first trailer, I would have been totally on board. By the third or fourth trailer, I'm like, oh, this movie is going to be exhausting to me.
So what do you think of that rhythm though in the Vox Machina show?
See, I think, and again, I'll try to keep this like plot spoiler free for people who either haven't seen campaign 1 or they just don't want to be spoiled on what's included in the show. Because the one thing I'll say is the show does seem to be moving at a clip, like it is smashing through the storyline relatively quickly.
Yeah.
But I think, for the record, I don't think the quippiness in Honor Among Thieves is bad. I'm not like, this is going to be a bad movie. It's a very me thing, and I'm very cognizant of that. I 100% agree with you, Shawn, that it totally replicates the experience of playing D&D at the table where, something really serious is happening. These people are about to get executed and now they're fighting for their lives, but it's not framed like that at all. It's framed as, Chris Pine can't cut the ropes on his wrists. Hilarious line. Would have loved it in the first trailer, but it's just exhausted me now. But I think it's the perfect tone for the D&D movie, as we've already discussed on the Lorecast. For Legends of Vox Machina, it tries, and I think it's trying to do a harder balancing act. Because with season 1 in particular, they had the Briarwoods, they had themes of horror, they had themes of war, and occupation and oppression, and the villains actively taunted the heroes. And so when that comedy, in fairly horrific ways, famously hanging the bodies of the heroes, kind of avatars from the sacred tree. And so balancing that tone with Pike then saying, sorry, Dante, let's go it up, just is really...
I thought we'd escaped it because of the Bassackwoods, but
nah.
There it is.
Nah. Because one thing I've noted in season 2, with Pike specifically, I don't know if this is an intentional character choice because Pike is small. I don't know whether this is something that's reflected from the campaign, but Pike just swears a lot. And like almost every line, she's saying something in a very modern, like, let's bash some heads in, or like, what's wrong with you guys, or like something like that, just constantly. And it really yanks me back out of the high drama fantasy that the rest of the show sort of tries to build, So I feel like Vox Machina have set themselves up for a harder challenge in balancing those two tones. But as a result, I don't think they quite manage it to be consistent and feel consistent the whole way through.
Well, this is something interesting because it's.
I think James and I have the actual answer with regards to Pike specifically.
Yeah. Well, it's Pike wasn't there a lot of the time, so they're kind of having to fabricate her character in this arc from whole cloth in a lot of ways.
Well, I was going to say that Pike begins right in the actual original campaign. So Pike began as a character who was a sort of a follower of Sarenrae, who's a Pathfinder god, who's a goddess of light and goodness and whatever. And then they translated it into 5e, and she sort of was still using that god, but she was a healing cleric, right? That was her thing, her whatever the subclass is called, the life
domain.
Cleric. Thank you. And as they went along, she was doing these things that Ashley found fun as a player, that were very violent or like a bit bloodthirsty and whatever. And so that led to the thing that was translated into the first series of Legends of Vox Machina, where she lost her sort of connection with her god. That in the campaign came from her acting against domain. Basically, she was acting against her god's beliefs, and then there was kind of a recommunication and a rejiggering that made Pike into a war cleric instead of a life cleric, and so she just got to actually indulge in that player behavior that she wanted to have fun with, and it is interesting to hear that kind of does happen in the show.
Yeah. Well, it's not even like her violence, right? Like I don't bat an eyelid at her.
I mean
it's just
that attitude,
the choice
of
language, like the specific choice of language.
Oh, we're back to the question of cursing. Okay, gotcha.
Well, yeah, I suppose we are.
I want to say, first of all, the animation of the show is gorgeous. It's dynamic. It's cool. It's character motivated. It's very. It goes into weird. Non-standard animation styles at times. It's talking about the past. I mean, the animation does everything right. It's very cool looking. That first action scene is awesome. The thing that gives me trouble with this show is something that is a little complicated, because the people who made the source material are like directly involved in the show, which makes it in many ways a very faithful adaptation. But doing a faithful adaptation is, hard even in a book where you're turning 400 pages into a 2-hour movie. It's much harder when you're turning a 400-hour campaign into just a couple of half-hour episodes. And we all knew this would happen, right? We all knew there would be some adaptation, distillation, that sort of thing, and we were all expecting it. But one of the more interesting choices they've made is that a lot of the plot beats are completely intact. They haven't distilled any plot beats into more, TV-sized moments. This struck me in episode 2 of the show, where they go to Vasselheim, the holy city. And basically all of the major beats that happen and it must be 2 or 3 sessions of the game, happen in that 1.5-hour episode. They leave Whitestone to go to Vasselheim. They speak with Highbearer Vord in the Platinum Sanctuary. They go to the Slayer's Take. They meet Kashaw and Zara, and that's a whole arc on its own, kind of distilled into this one scene too. They speak with the Sphinx. Grog has a meeting with his fighting master. Percy learns that Ripley is alive and speaks with Victor the Black Powder Merchant. All of these wild things happen. Because they happened in the show, and they're just distilled all in here. And I think the show could get away with that if it didn't have a main cast of like 7 characters. You're watching, say, Stranger Things, which I am right now, rewatching with my mom. And it's got an enormous cast, but all of these scenes only have 2 or 3 or 4 characters in it at once. You can really get the sense of their interplay and their dynamics and stuff like that. And when all of Vox Machina, 7-character D&D party is all together, all of these flavors kind of distill into D&D party flavor, makes the characters feel kind of one-dimensional. Grog being off on his own in that episode is awesome, because we get to see some pure, unadulterated Grog. In the next episode, Sunken Tomb, where some real stuff happens to the twins flavor is awesome. But this show really chugs like its processor is lagging when all of Vox Machina are on screen at once, just because those characters are all so fun, but they don't taste like much when they're all put together on screen at once.
For sure. It struck me in episode 2 as well, particularly with Victor being such a beloved character. I'm so sorry, Dael, and spoiler warning for everybody else. He seemed very like just shoved in there as an Easter egg, almost more than a character, which surprised me because I know that he was like this character that kind of got pulled out of Matt's back pocket was my impression. And so he was never like, he's not Gilmore, right? He's not this ongoing character that has great importance to the plot of campaign 1. But my impression was that he was so beloved that I really thought they would bake him into this in a massive way, which they kind of don't. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see him again. And you can see they are needing to pick and choose what they're able to put in there and still condense this down into, a consumable half-hour TV show with 8 episodes or however many it is, 12 episodes. I don't know off the top of my head. But I actually think they're doing a good job of it because I think you're right. I think that grog moment was really good. I think that the twins arc in episode 3 really worked for me. I thought that was very, very effective. It very much worked for Tori because she was like, next one. And I was like, you got to wait a week. So yeah, I think from story pacing, I actually, for me as someone who's not like, I don't know the ins and outs of campaign 1, especially not past the Briarwood arc super well. I think that this story feels like the pacing is quick, but satisfying. As I've already talked about, I think it was
Can I ask why? What is the reason for them to go to Vasselheim in the show? Just because in the campaign they had the Horn of Orcus that they had to take to the thing, but that happened pre the Briarwood arc, and so that wasn't included. But I just realized that I don't know why they would go to Vasselheim.
They go because the Platinum Sanctuary might have some way to help them with the dragons, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's slid through very, very smoothly, actually. Yeah.
Made sense to me.
Yeah.
Made sense to me.
I got to give my signal to chat that we're done with the spoilers.
We're done.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't think we were going to go into spoiler territory, and then we did. So I apologize to anybody in chat, but 3-year-old campaign at the moment. Anyway, all right. Let us jump into. We'll do. Oh, actually, speaking of exciting things, earlier in the year, we're not going to dive into a full topic right now because we will undoubtedly talk about this many times over the coming weeks. I've already expressed in an earlier episode how excited I am for Raider's Guide to Valikan, or Grim Hollow Valikan Clans, which is the next project from Ghostfire Gaming. But I just wanted to mention it quickly this week. I'll throw a link into the chat. If you are interested, if you have listened to our previous episodes and are getting pumped for Raider's Guide to Valikan, I've just put a link in the chat and I will put it in the show notes down below to go and... it's not a Fishblade announcement, J Pizza Beats. We'll talk about that in a moment. You can go to the Kickstarter page, sign up to get updates.
Been here for an hour.
Yeah, I know. It feels like it too. All right. So yes, go. Man, I've just completely butchered this announcement. Go check out the Kickstarter page. It's going to be great. We'll talk about it lots in future weeks. I'm super excited. I can't stop talking about it. Fishblade. I went like 3 full days believing this was a real RPG. I'm not even kidding.
Come on now.
Indie RPGs are a bit of a mystery to me, and I just completely believed there could be an indie RPG where the whole party control a fish that carries a blade.
And of course, I have no doubt that now there are many Fishblade RPGs.
Yeah,
about 1,000.
Absolutely.
I've seen at least 2 made so far. So yeah.
See, there you go. Because it's look, the internet is riding high off of Goncharov.
Mm-hmm. Which is great, by the way. I remember seeing it as a kid.
Caitlin Bruder made an RPG for Goncharov as well. You know, it just happens. And now we've got our very own tabletop RPG version of Goncharov, which just happens to be Fishblade. I also like Fishblade because I feel like a lot of people who are getting mad about Fishblade have taught a lot of the internet what it's like to have a D&D YouTube channel. You say something innocuous and everyone's mad at you and tells you to play another game.
Let us end the episode there. It is actually a little bit earlier than where we had started, but I don't think we've quite got time to jump into another topic. Warehouse Bard, thank you for gifting a sub to the Twitch channel. If you want to catch us on Twitch, you can find us at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on a Monday. Or if you are living in Australia, it is 11 a.m. Tuesday. And if you're living elsewhere in the world, God's luck to you in finding what the time is, because I don't know off the top of my head. But the edited version of the Lorecast is always out on YouTube by Wednesday in the States, Thursday, Australia time, where you can catch us on YouTube, you can catch us on Spotify, you can catch us on Podcatcher. There's everywhere there are good podcasts. You can find this #1 tabletop RPG podcast. I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill. Dael, you derailed it.
I did nothing of the sort, and I will not carry the blame.
All right, I've been Ben Byrne here with James Hake, Shawn Merle, and Dael Kingsmill. You'll catch us next week. We'll be back talking more Fishblade, undoubtedly. Go check out Raiders Guide to Valikan. Goodbye. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
What a Lorecast.
What a
Let's do it again.
Yay.
Back to one. Back to one.
Yeah, right. Let's just do a top and tail. Top and tail, everyone.
Thank you.
First line, last line. Yeah, great.